Impressions, 1965 to 1980. Chapter 1. Industrial Disputes. The blossoming youth culture at the country's helm gave an indication where the country was heading, as the Beatles dominated the sound waves. Within 4 years, the voting age dropped to 18. A survey by the lobby group Child Poverty Action Group showed that large families continued to be the major cause of poverty. An increase in child allowance had no effect on my income. Any increase I received was immediately removed by income tax. My working life remained greatly affected, as everyone else's did, by the antics of the militant trade unionists. The threat of walkouts, instigated almost without warning, became a daily, almost a weekly event from miners to dockers, car and dockyard workers. It was depressing. A special police group formed to deal with public unrest, usually outside the factory gates. It almost became a comedy. Jokes were made on the radio, Peter Sellers acting the trade union official in I'm All Right Jack with Ian Carmichael as the new employee, and commentators taking off Red Robbo, the union activist at British Leyland. Away from the influence, viewed from afar, it might well have been a good Whitehall farce, but if you were involved, it was very uncomfortable, worrying, and indeed lamentable. Although the working environment in many firms, particularly the larger, was strained by poor industrial arrangements, this did not extend to all. Even within those firms who distanced themselves from the unions, there were always a few militant members who tried to stir up unrest. These firms that had a strong management who laid down strict guidelines that they stuck to and refused to take on known troublemakers, that told the union head office that they would not take on any more labour if forced to employ such people. In these instances, and I worked at a number, they were not forced to, the unions not wanting a fight. It was known that if firms had on their books union officials, on national or executive councils, the union head office, not wanting to make their representatives' positions difficult, backed off. This strong management ethos would not work so well in nationalized industries. Workers would call out allied trades and firms supplying parts or materials. Some of these activities were local part-time union officials who sat on committees, were well known at union headquarters. Being told that if they wanted employment they would have to curb their union activities never went down well. In those instances, firms shut down their UK factories and went abroad. Life at home, compensated for the stresses of work, was fulfilling. The children well used to the routine of school, kindergarten, library and family outings. Sally gave birth to Ruth on September the 2nd, our second girl. This was another landmark for our family, who were mostly graced by boys. Simon prepared to start at Longfield Primary School, at the same time as Janice, the next-door neighbour's daughter. I remember my first days at Longfield. It didn't seem so long ago, and it remained unchanged over the years. Excited by the thought, Simon, even though given up his friends at the kindergarten, took to school easily. David was about to begin at the play school, taking Simon's place, and keen to get cracking, doing all the things that Simon had been talking about. When David was born in 1961, only 5% of 18-year-olds entered university. We had the goal to prepare all our children to go into higher education. Rachel was 2, sleeping in her cot in the small front bedroom. It was a lovely period, the family all doing so well, happily having many outside influences and all taking part in the various outings and holidays. Rita, Sally's mother, was a frequent visitor, being picked up from her home by car to be taken back home in the evening. She played an enormous part in raising the children, always taking an interest, reading stories, babysitting, creating a link with the past. She was very much involved in all that the family was doing or planning to do. not in some interfering way, but listening to everybody, making sensible comments, thereby being a stabilizing element. Totally accepted. It was exactly what I wanted to happen. It was sad my parents were not so interested. I don't remember one visit being made in an unplanned or off-the-cuff visit, and I cannot remember any reason why they were so disinterested. There had to be some adjustments to the sleeping arrangements, so we had plans drawn up to develop the loft and have an attic bedroom. These passed by the local planning control without any restrictions. The dormer window, one for the forced landing and the other for the bedroom, looked out on the rear garden, faced east. The sides were tile-hung. The new room measured 6 feet where the stairs came up from the bedroom below, by 16, widening to 8 foot for the rear half. A large, fitted wardrobe completed the structure, and this proved to be a boon, and provided a bedroom for Simon and David, and later Benjamin. We enlarged the kitchen, taking the side wall out another 4 feet, totally revamping the interior, having the hot water system updated too. We felt we were making a fine start to creating a good home for an expanding family in a pleasant suburban town, close to all schools. In 1965 there were still grammar schools in the borough, skimming off the top stream of junior school achievers. As each school only admitted about 30 new students per year, this restricted the social mobility of the vast majority, even though children could sit for the entrance for the second year, finally sieved those for secondary schools. Secondary modern schools lacked the dedication of the top 2 streams, whose work ethic helped maintain a higher discipline. Parents of high achievers to keep an eye on what was going on, how their children affected by less disciplined bottom streams. Over 80% of the working population was a trade union member. This ensured that there should be a great bond between the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Social inclusion was part of their manifesto, and the betterment of workers' lives included education for their children, free, and a higher standard achieved within a comprehensive system. That was the idea of Shirley Williams, Secretary of Education. Through weakness, not insisting on all children attending a comprehensive school, including those who were free-paying, privately educated, and not pumping in sufficient funds to ensure the scheme took off, the scheme faltered, never to achieve the planner's goals. Sally and I were not fully alive to the changes experienced by our children in a comprehensive educational system. We were no different from many other parents. Who could have predicted the almost immediate lowering of standards and lack of discipline? It is obvious that if there are no enforced standards, and you cannot remove troublemakers and the lazy, standards will drop. The freedom allowed to children, more women working, and the abounding youth culture changed society forever. Coupled with a sexual behavioural thing gleaned from the media, writing about the new cultural elite and women's new place in society. We had busy lives to lead, and formal education was just about to start for our eldest. We thought that society, and the educational system within it, would be exactly the same as the one we had grown up with, so we planned ahead, basing everything on our past experiences. It is not that we took our eye off the ball, allowing the government and local education authorities to ride roughshod. We were in uncharted territory. If we could rely upon our children receiving a good formal education, we should concentrate on providing a happy learning environment at home, backed up by visiting galleries and museums, incorporating music and drama lessons, all as a total learning experience. Mainly with the children's learning in mind, and to make them socially integrated, able to deal with their peers, we sought the help of a preschool in Pinner. Eventually, all our children attended the school, either adding drama or dancing to their normal studies. I had also set my mind on all the children learning to play the piano, as a matter of course, when they reached 7. Sally and I had expectations that children should be well-mannered, speak correctly, and be obedient. My own upbringing defined this as a prerequisite. I could see by observation that Sally's home life had been built upon similar standards. I could never understand why other parents allowed their children to wander around whilst eating and drinking, or to roam whilst the adults finished their meal. Similarly, not sitting still at the table or banging their cutlery, shouting, screaming, or generally playing about. Bad behaviour is not just of the present age. There has always been a belief by some parents that we mustn't stifle children's behaviour, self-expression, or creativity for fear of restraining natural growth. I believe it's better to lead by example, giving explanations why doing what you want when you want it leads to disruption, false expectations, and hopes. Allowing children to dictate how those around them have to change their behaviour to accommodate theirs is antisocial. Children taught that there is a time and place for everything curb their natural desires for immediate action. The family's few holidays after my father-in-law's death were with Rita, and after a couple of years she elected to stay behind, especially as the family grew. Thereafter, we always had our holidays 1 week at a time at half-term, and perhaps an extra week in the summer. One of these was usually the spring half-term, always to be held at Eastbourne, at the YMCA, where we had spent many happy years exploring the local countryside and beaches. These 3 one-week holidays did increase as the unions negotiated extra weeks' holidays, always spent away from home to create a break from the routine, socialise the children, and give Sally a break. The car was packed to the gunwales with children and clothes, buckets and spades, boots and pushchair ready to disgorge at the seafront opposite the hotel. There we would, over the years, meet the same staff who made us very welcome, giving us a special tea especially just for the children. Evening entertainments were formed around organised games like beetle drives, pinball, and table tennis. Our trips into the country, plotted on an ordnance survey map, taking a circular route that included as many interesting historical sites as possible. It was difficult each year to do a route not experienced before. Although the ordnance survey map describes accurately what is within a given area, it doesn't say how the route changes according to season, weather conditions, or to alterations since the map was surveyed. It leaves out that there is a bull, the stile is missing, the path overgrown, or that the farmer has ploughed right up to the field's boundary over the path. Many other times we have found ourselves in a difficult position, faced with vicious barbed wire, giant stinging nettles, lethal brambles, and storm-filled ditches and streams, menacing cattle, private roads, and overgrown tracks. These more negative features, to an otherwise jolly occasion, needed a high degree of positive thinking on my part. I had to impart sufficient joie de vivre to fortify not just the bedraggled, wet, tired, hungry masses, but Sally, who was still bringing up the rear echelons, about to retire from the struggle. I am pleased to report that there were neither mutinies nor mass pickets the following morning. We all set off in high expectations after an injection of exciting tales of daring do in the tribal lands. It was probably the thought of cheese rolls made in the back of the car which gave them hope and succour, to be reached at an appropriate stage in the walk. These difficult times, experienced by all on walking holidays in Britain, have to be got over. I did it by entertaining, keeping the children busy during the day, a task needing considerable effort. As soon as negativity and giving up, not wanting to walk or not joining in happened, that tolled the bell of passing day. I couldn't continue against dismal moods. It became too much effort to overcome their lack of spirit. Fortunately, this didn't happen until they were very much older. It was not just these times at Eastbourne, which had the comfort of a warm hotel at the end of the afternoon, but happened to when we went to Ludlow, or to some distant ramshackled farmhouse selected from the farm holiday handbook borrowed from the library. It was always taking pot luck that sometimes leads to some remarkable places to stay. By this time my brother Stan had 3 children, Michael being born the same year as Ruth. That same year Jean became pregnant again, which brought about a yearning in Sally to have another baby. However much I described the effects this addition might have to the family exchequer, Sally was adamant that that is what she wanted, that another baby wouldn't cost any more because we had already had all the clothes and furniture. David, who had the most easy-going nature, never gave us cause to have any fear that new experiences would upset him. Went to school in September, attending the same school as Simon. His work progressed very much on the same lines as Simon, the difference being that Simon's class had a preponderance of girls, whereas David's was more evenly spread. As all parents, we became used to the school routine, requirements for homework, the school uniform, and the times for starting and finishing. Rachel, who was 3, now helped look after Ruth, walking to the shops and library, and over the hill to Grandma's. At that stage, in 1966, I was becoming aware that no matter how much I worked to cushion unplanned expenditure, I would never be able to put money aside. I explained to Sally that I was concerned that we would never be able to afford all the extracurricular activities, and certainly not private junior education. Sally said that we seemed to be able to cope, and couldn't see how our situation could easily be changed by unforeseen circumstances, because we had all the things necessary for family life, announcing joyously, "I'm pregnant again." Sally paid the bills, usually through the bank, at the same time as the shopping, budgeting for the following week. I don't ever remember putting money aside for emergencies, let alone holidays. What money came in went out. I had just enough to pay my fare or petrol to work, and about £15 a week for food, tobacco, and a daily paper. The routine started when I was first married and continued whilst working in industry. Having a child at 2-year intervals soaked up the increase in salary, not giving a chance to put some by. The perpetual overtime cushioned any unplanned-for events sufficient to allow maintaining the house and car and keeping up the kindergarten and music lessons. Saving is a habit, a good habit perfected when young. When explained you cannot have something when you want it, and putting something aside for a rainy day, are 2 well-known sayings. Things cannot be planned perfectly, even the far-seeing. It gives comfort and security to have a float. Unfortunately, our float was more overtime working. This was the year the Wilson government set up Britain's first Race Relations Act, whose powers were aimed to reconcile cases of discrimination based on grounds of colour or race. This extended a couple of years later to include employment and housing. It was this action by the government which prompted right-wing groups to band together to form the National Front. 2 years later, Enoch Powell gave a speech which included the River Tiber remark, ultimately to lead to his dismissal. Still, the unions pushed for higher wages and shorter hours. The wage freeze, which was initially voluntary, proved ineffective. Even though the policy gave backing, the Labour Party didn't consider what was to happen after the year was up. Britain stepped further back from its one-time imperial role in Africa. It was difficult for me to keep pace financially with the number of outgoings, even though I was still doing the same amount of overtime. I was never ill or had an accident. Being employed in a high-earning occupation, as well as being able most weeks to do overtime to pay for extras, we could maintain this standard of living. Industrial strikes, changes in work pattern, redundancy and firms closing, avoided if possible, and I was always scanning the job vacancy list or thinking of new ways to secure a steady income. It was all quite stressful, having to do things which I didn't really want to do. Taking on new technology was not something I really wanted to do either. scanners and electronics, in any form, I had a natural antipathy. It was steeped in the past, being used to craft methods of reproduction. My training locked me into a time warp of hand skills gained over a long period. So my life, bringing up a family, providing for them, continued. I was most disturbed that I couldn't make Sally see that there was more to life than just having more children, providing those that we did have with a better start, giving them time, showing greater interest, all would benefit. Benjamin was born July the 16th, 3 days before my birthday, in 1967. Simon started Cub Scouting and piano lessons about the same time. My preconceived ideas about making sure my children were able to swim continued, and they all started at the age of 4. Every Saturday morning we would go to North Holt swimming baths and watch them go through their lessons. Having piano tuition now began, and we were very lucky finding a young woman who was about to start teaching the piano. Miss Day was perfect for the job, within walking distance of home and with a natural affinity to young children. I explained what I wanted, that all the children was to have lessons when the time came, and she agreed that 7 was the right age to start, leaving out the theory until later in the process. The tuition books were bought in Harrow at the music shop in accordance with her wishes, and Sally's mother provided a music case. Rita was in total agreement with what we were proposing, and told us of a piano that she knew was up for sale. We bought it, had it refelted, retuned and polished. It was not brought up to total pitch, thought that the newly refurbished action wouldn't take full tightening of the strings. We continued until the next retune. I was very pleased that all my previous thoughts about the positive nature of music lessons were paying off. Each child, when introduced to lessons, took them uncomplainingly, as a matter of course, exactly as I thought they would. To further help their understanding, I thought about getting the children to hear music performed professionally. At work, our monthly union meetings had changed from Doughty Street to Red Lion Square in Holborn. At the Conway Hall, recitals were given every Sunday at a very low cost, being subsidized from adult education. Most of the recitals were string quartets, and as a family we occupied the gallery. Rita gave us further venues to try, and one was at the Chiswick Music Society. This we fitted in with those of Red Lion Square. Those at Chiswick were for accompanied solo artists, singers, and music lecturers. By this time Simon began recorder lessons at school, and often accompanied his grandmother at the piano with the recorder. Sally's mother took on another part-time job, playing piano at a local school for dance. This she combined with her permanent position at Sudbury Junior School, teaching piano and recorder, taking the children through their exams, playing at choir practice and morning assembly. These teaching posts filled by taking a bus to Sudbury from the bottom of her road. The Operatic Society of Greenford used Rita to accompany them whilst playing Gilbert and Sullivan operas. On other evenings she played recorder with a group which gave occasional concerts and playing cello with the Wembley Orchestra. Simon was afforded more attention and detailed scrutiny than any of the other subsequent children. This wasn't intentional, but a matter of course. Every parent lavishes special care on the firstborn, because they are new parents. It's only natural. This does have rather negative aspects, especially with the second child, who has to take second fiddle. We questioned every sound, movement, and mannerism, seeking answers to, is this normal behaviour? Do they always breathe like that? Shouldn't we do something about it? Through this concern and attention, they can develop faster, walk and talk sooner, become potty trained at an earlier stage than later arrivals. This evens out and does not become a lifetime advance over their siblings, even though relatives, friends and health workers clutch at these forms of behaviour as a mean of comparison. However, It can cause resentment if not reasoned as being accepted as normal. I have written previously about the feelings I held towards my elder brother, feelings that I had not only as a child but as a teenager too. I was aware that he appeared brighter, more alert, cleverer, and more successful. These deficiencies within me that I felt so keenly were not things which I compared to others' failings, but to feelings that I held within myself. I knew Stan to be more disciplined towards study, and more seriously minded towards his training. His natural inborn skills and attributes compensated to some extent by my more artistic feelings. My younger brother Derek got married that year to Carol Howard at the same Methodist church that Stan had. Shortly after that same year, Roger, Sally's brother, and Thelma, living at Buckhurst Hill, had their first son, Crispin. Sally and I visited in turn both my brothers in their new homes, Stan in Chesham and Derek in Abingdon, as well as Roger and Thelma at Buckhurst Hill. These visits reciprocated throughout every year, keeping us all up to date with what each of us were doing. Sally's mother, who was very kind to afford us the time and consideration, babysat for us. Sally and I bought our first washing machine in 1960. It was a twin tub and had to be pumped out into the sink every wash. It was invaluable, especially for us having such a family. There was a certain amount of satisfaction having 2 washing lines filled with nappies and liners, with all the other baby clothes and accessories. This was purchased about the same time as our first refrigerator, allowing us to join the other 30% of the population in owning one. Ruth was slow at beginning to talk. This was not of great concern, but something needed to be done to ensure that this state of affairs didn't carry on. Every time I came home, when not doing overtime, I went up to her bedroom, where she had her high-sided cot, a small front box room, and began to do what was to become a continuing exercise of speech therapy, using a balloon to articulate sounds by vibration, reciting common words and reading nursery rhymes. Within a relatively short period of time, Ruth got it. There was no looking back after her first grasping the idea, and reading became no problem. Sally told me that she was pregnant again. This time it was her 37th birthday of 1969. This was not only a shock, but also much unexpected, and I must say I was quite annoyed. I made up my mind that this could not happen again, and I did something about it. Sally wasn't at all pleased, but I explained that we couldn't afford any more children if we wanted to give every child a chance to have extracurricular tuition in whatever sphere that they showed an interest in. I was now 34, with 6 children, trying to keep many plates spinning. As for full-time private education, that was already not a possibility for any of them. We were already paying each one to have piano and swimming lessons, as well as drama for Simon and David, dancing for Rachel, and later pony riding for Ruth. Sally said that if she couldn't have any more children, I would regret it. I could see that trying to explain my feelings to Sally, that having more children was going to reduce the amount that we could do for those we already had, was impossible. That what was possible when they were young was not the same for what could be done when they were older. That it wasn't fair that one could have a better start than another. I was getting older, and I could visualize that I wouldn't be able to give all the children the same attention, that our holidays would never be the same, with the whole family participating. Our family was enlarged to 6 that coming December by the birth of Rebecca, who was active, alert, and ever questioning, all good signs for the future. As with all the other births, it was successful and accomplished. Sally delighted in having another child, which she breastfed for as long as possible, gaining much from the experience. With all the children, this went on for over a year, and I'm sure the children benefited. The old pushchair would have to do even more noble service, and so too all the other pieces of equipment. What a massive release and relief it was to know that there would be not any more children. The house was beginning to burst at the seams, and there were not any more spaces to take up. Quite what was going to happen when Rebecca finally had to move out of our room I couldn't imagine. There would have to be 3 girls in one room. Not a sensible or happy turn of events. The pattern of the family continued. Nothing was changed. We still went to the library every Saturday, where all the children had their own books. We still had a bag of sweets to help us on our way home. The concerts, trips to museums, galleries and Commonwealth Institute continued. Blackberry picking during the end of the summers, walks arranged along the canal, and holidays still prompted a farm holiday book out of the library. Scouts, cubs, brownies, choir practice for Simon and David, and all the other routines continued unabated. We were complimented wherever we went on the good behaviour of the children, and as a family we all did the same thing together. There was never any friction or dissent. We still didn't have a television to watch. Card games were played quite a lot. Monopoly, chess, draughts and Lego took up any spare time. Once started, piano lessons were accompanied by the annual exam. All the children took them and passed each exam as it came along, and getting them to do their practice was, by now, such a normal everyday occurrence that they did it without question. And this is what I thought would happen all those years ago, when I first thought of my children having lessons. This acceptance of what was normal practice applied to all the other activities taken up, and if other challenges presented themselves, they took up a place alongside the others as a matter of course. My mother had been a diabetic for about 10 years, and treated herself to injections prescribed by her doctor. Now that my parents were living at Pinner Green, Derek having moved out when he married Carol in 1967, with Nan, who had by this time retired, occupying Derek's room, Dad was 80, still active, quite capable of walking to North Harrow to visit us. He never understood when my mother was due for an injection, nor did he keep a check on what she was doing. I was called up by Nan in an emergency one day and asked to come round, for Mum was ill, suspected that she had not had her diabetic injection. When I arrived, Mum and Nan were pacing around not knowing what to do, and Mum was by this time in a delirious state. The doctor had been called, and he arrived shortly after me. He asked a number of questions about what had gone on and what medication administered. No one knew. This lack of knowledge totally threw the doctor, who then dithered about, saying that perhaps it would be better to get Mum to hospital, as she had by this time passed into a coma. With that, I returned home to await news, which was not long in coming. My mother was declared dead within a few hours, never regaining consciousness. She was 61. What a terrible waste, for I discovered later her death was totally unnecessary. Had the doctor given her a large dose of insulin, she would have not gone into a coma, and even if the cause had been by some other reason other than not having her injection, a further dose would not have had a disastrously detrimental effect. My father was now at a loss. He didn't want Nan to be in the flat, although he probably realized that life would be difficult for him if she wasn't there. He appreciated that it would be impossible to live with either Stan's family or mine, for there was just no room. There was obviously going to be a problem my father couldn't come to terms with. He was patently clear that he would be far better off staying where he was, sharing the flat with Nan. But he couldn't feel happy, for whatever reason, her being so close. They had known each other for my father's married life. He never spoke of it, nor did she. They both went their own way. In the end, they both split up, having to go into separate council homes. Neither home awful, but they didn't provide privacy which they both wanted. Gradually they deteriorated. Nan died within a year, and Dad a year later.